you go somewhere like the Diamond District or Burlington Arcade in London, you just see lineups of 30, 40 Newman Daytonas, vintage Submariners, just all sitting next to each other, like in a window. So, and they feed you this line that they're all rare. They're not rare.
I was about to just say that.
Not rare.
I was going to say, like, the story is that they're rare, and then you can walk in somewhere and there's like 30 of them on the wall.
Yeah, and look, like some of the really like big collectors, I'm really pissing Ben off right now.
No, I just have a response to him.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Wrist Enthusiast Radio. I'm here with Ben and Derek, and today we are talking about modern versus vintage watches. But before we do that, we're going to talk about what's on our wrist today. So, Derek?
All right, so I'll start first. You know, it's summer. It's officially past Memorial Day. I can wear white shorts, white rubber watch straps.
Does it count? Does the white pants thing bleed over into watch straps?
I think as long as you're able to wear white, you can wear white on the white straps. So today...
So you can't wear that in the winter, the white strap.
I have. But I'm just saying, especially now, it's more fun. So today I'm wearing the Vacheron Constantin Overseas Blue Dial 41mm, reference 4500V. It is on a white rubber strap from Vacheron. You might have noticed, I've done a video on this before, and this is the ultra thin strap. So that way the watch actually wears a lot more snug to my wrist. The original straps on the Overseas are always flare out. So this strap comes from their perpetual calendar Overseas. And I was able to order one, and now I can't take it off the strap because it looks so much better like this.
It looks so good.
It kind of fixes the issue of it flaring out too much on my wrist. It still is a big watch, but at
the time, 41?
It's 41, but the lug to lug is like 49, right? Like it's really taking up the space.
Still smaller than the Royal Oak. My 41mm Royal Oak's like 51mm lug.
Yeah, because of the end link to end link. Yeah.
So my question is this.
Sure.
So during the height of COVID in the watch market, you know, obviously the Royal Oak and Nautilus were almost untouchable. And then I think the next watch people went to in the integrated steel sport watch was the Overseas. But I've heard that they've kind of come down a lot. Have you seen demand come down?
I haven't seen demand come down for it, but if you look at secondary pricing, you will see that obviously some of them are trading below retail. When during the pandemic, like up until 2022, this blue dial could go for like double retail. It's still trading above, but not as crazy. Whereas the other colors that are like maybe the white, the silver dial or the black dial, those have come down a lot. They've come down to pretty much pre-pandemic. But people are still asking for it. We have people coming into our store still asking for it. Vacheron just, you know, the way they allocate it to us is we don't get to choose when we get it. We get like so few a year, maybe one a year. And that's not guaranteed of every model.
Blue dial.
We don't even get blue dials anymore. Blue dials are all boutique only since 2021. So we haven't gotten blue dials for 2-3 years now. And then maybe last year we would get we don't get like one black dial chronograph, one black dial dual time, one black dial 41. We'll get like one black dial dual time for the whole year.
Do they tell you when it's coming, or does it just show up at your door?
They might tell us like a couple weeks before it's ready to ship. And at that time, obviously we have a list and we have to I hate that we have to choose people, but we do have to do it just because there's no way we can just if everyone's asking for it, we do want to make sure that the customers we have that are very loyal and working with us a lot, we want to make sure that we reward them. And if they say no, that's good because another customer can pick up on it too.
Yeah.
So that happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go next.
Yeah, sure.
So I didn't know what to wear today. I haven't worn this in a while. I'm wearing the Mad 1. So the Mad 1 in red. It's been. Well,
check that out.
It's by Max Busser, and it's kind of an MB&F, but not really. So MB&Fs, as you probably know, end up being 100,000 plus for most of them. I reviewed a couple. I can't afford any. So having the opportunity to buy something made by Max Busser that is in the $3,000 price point is pretty cool. It has the movements inverted, so this is actually the rotor on the back, and it has a Miyota movement, but the time display is actually on the side of the case. with these rings that kind of move around. It's pretty cool. I enjoy it. It's a real conversation piece, and I like that they did something that kind of allowed people that might not be able to get into MB&F as a brand to get something that had the same kind of like design language or similar design language. So, I enjoy it a lot. It's a cool piece. And then you just kind of spin it and just stare.
I will say I've seen a few of these these are called Mad Ones, not MB&Fs. But I've seen these Mad Ones several times on some other colleagues of ours in the industry, and it's always really interesting when I see it because I'm like, this is such a cool and creative way to make a watch. I will say I do like what the Mad One release like strategy was because I remember when the Mad One Green came out, like there were people who wanted to get it and like lost 2 times previously, like on the red one and the green one. And so they made a third one, which I think was a Mad One Lucky. And so if you lost 2 or 3 times in the raffle, you were automatically like chosen for this third one. And I thought that was such a breath of fresh air for the industry because everyone's so used to being on a wait list. Everyone can relate to being on a wait list, even myself, and then not getting called for something. But for a brand to be like, you know what? You didn't get called 2 or 3 times. We're actually going to just allocate you one straight up. Yeah. That's so cool.
That's how it should be.
Yeah, that's so cool.
There's, a decent amount of them out there. So I now wonder how much of their business is like Mad Ones versus actual MB&F.
It's all under the same company technically? Or
so this is like Mad Gallery.
Oh, okay.
So, but the Mad Gallery is like, their equivalent to an MB&F store. So I was at the Mad Gallery in Geneva during Watches and Wonders, and so
they have like sculptures.
They have sculptures
too, right?
and stuff.
Yeah,
so
cool.
they made it clear that this wasn't an MB&F,
right?
But it's still part of kind of like the Mad, the
series,
the whole ecosystem. So it's kind of a little bit.
It's
different.
mad, all right.
It's mad. It's mad. So that's what I'm wearing today, awesome. Ben.
Guess I'll go. So this is back-to-back Christopher Wards. Not a sponsor at all.
but if you want to.
If you want to, yeah. I'm obsessed with Christopher Ward. I have been. It was my first watch I ever bought. I talked about it on the podcast a while ago. But this is the Christopher Ward 12X Titanium. It was to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Christopher Ward, I think, and then the 10th anniversary of the movement, the FS01 movement. Derek was asking to see it.
Yeah, you know what? Sorry, I gotta pass my watch around.
So this was a big deal for them. So like the 12 was obviously a big deal for Christopher Ward coming out with that. I remember when I was told, I was like, this is going to be an absolute hit. And I think the watch is like the best under $2,000 in my opinion. And then they came out with this, which has been hit with either you love it or why would I spend $5,000 on a Christopher Ward?
So I reviewed, that's titanium, right?
Correct, yeah.
And I reviewed the titanium. First of all, is it the 12 or just 12 so it's called the 12, right?
The 12, yeah.
So when you say Christopher Ward, do you say Christopher Ward 12 or do you say Christopher Ward the 12?
I say Christopher Ward 12, and then I'm talking about I say the 12. I don't know what's exactly PC.
Mike Pearson, if you are watching this, send us
the proper phrasing of this.
Phrasing of how you pronounce the model. But I reviewed the super thin titanium with the green kind of fume dial, and yeah, the finishing is just on par with something that's going to be, I would say, close to $10,000 or
easily
more. And it just like there's no rough edges. A lot of the problems you see in the kind of under $2,000 price point, they're just not there on this watch. And I really I was thinking about picking up the 12 myself. I ended up not doing it for now just because there's other stuff that I wanted. But if I was picking up another integrated stainless steel or integrated sport watch under $2,000, it would be at the top of my list.
The reason for all those things you said is they're the most transparent about their pricing structure. So I feel like a lot of brands, when you are buying, you're like, how much? That's my thought. I guess it's like it's every watch person's thought. How much are they making on this watch?
Yeah.
What
did they
is
say
the labor? So it's 3 times cost. That's what they make every watch as. I think that's really transparent. I think there are some brands where they're making 20, 30, 40 times cost. That's just name of luxury. So that's why when they're able to make something like this, which is like $5,000, it probably could be a $9,000 watch if it had another branding on it. And I think that's so cool that they're able to make it for that price. So people say it's not worth it. It's 100% worth it, but it's just your decision whether if you like the watch.
And that's why you can't buy it in retail.
Yeah, I was about to say it has to be direct to consumer. Yeah, because it doesn't really work if you have like another partner in there, because everyone's gonna want to, if you're selling this, everyone who's gonna get involved is want to make something off of it.
They have the showroom in the UK somewhere. Don't ask me where because I forget. And then I do know for a fact that this is public. They're opening a store in Austin, which is I think it's Austin, somewhere in Texas. Where Mike is.
That's where Mike is. Yeah.
So they're gonna open another showroom there too. And then the only other places you can see it are at watch shows. So like Wind Up or stuff like that.
I will say the first time I saw a Christopher Ward 12, I'm gonna just call it 12 instead of D12.
D12.
It was at Wind Up Watch Fair here in New York City last October, and I was actually really blown away. I didn't get to see the skeleton because it didn't release at that time. But I got to see like the ice blue dial and like their texture dials for the first time, and I was like, wow, the quality on this is really good. Like it's definitely a step above something like the Tissot PRX, especially when you have them side by side. So I was like, I can see why people are raving about this. I can see why it's popular. And what size is this that you have?
That's a 41. So most of them come in 40 or 35, and they're a lot thinner. I think because of the movement inside there, they had to make it thicker and bigger. But it's like,
but you get some more depth in there, right? Like, probably that you wouldn't get.
Actually, this for 41. See, you're holding my 41 overseas, and this is a 41 Christopher Ward, and this one wears a lot better.
Well, it has no lugs, right? So it just like slopes down.
Yeah, it slopes right down.
Definitely wears a little bit smaller.
Pointing it straight at that camera to see if you can kind of see it. Yeah. But this is awesome.
So this watch and the Chopek Antarctique remind me of each other.
Yes. They're,
I
don't know. They haven't said it publicly. Nobody from the company has told me like if that's the case. But like when you see like maybe not this one necessarily, but like the actual 12 with like the marker, because this doesn't have like the indices like the other one.
But the Chopek, the Antarctique with is it the chronograph or the Rattrapant? It's a skeletonized dial.
I've never handled one of them in person, so I can't speak on it.
Yeah, they're nice, but they're also, 20 times the price of this. So, there's only so much design. And then you could say that both of them are similar to like the Royal Oak, right? So you're going down a rabbit hole when you start saying, we had that problem with Ren where people are like, oh, it looks like this or it looks like this. Like we've had comparisons to Seiko, to Oris, to other brands. And it's kind of like, well, it's a dive watch. It has like a dive bezel and a sandwich dial. It's like there's only so like.
Let me ask you: is there any brand that someone would mention that you'd be like, yeah, it is like that? And is there any brand that you'd be like, no, it's completely not like that?
I did have influences, and I don't really want to get into them when I started creating it. But it like kind of the dial color I had an influence, but what we ended up doing, there was actually a lot of back and forth with like our factory where it ended up changing a lot over time. So it ended up not actually being kind of the color that I initially wanted.
Yeah.
So that influence kind of went away over time.
Right.
And then we just like want the way that we design like the case and everything else, it's just like more of like a vintage kind of inspired. So like anyone that's like, it looks like this watch or looks like this watch, I'm like, all these, it looks like
especially divers. All divers are inspired by each other at some point.
Yeah, exactly. So
they're all Submariners.
Yeah.
They're all 50 fathoms. Like,
I can't believe it has a 60-minute bezel.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So anyways, so that's what's on our wrist today. So as I said, today we're talking about new modern versus vintage watches, and we're going to kind of do the case, I guess, for each and against each.
Sure.
Ben and I have, I think, strong opinions.
Yeah, we do.
I don't know. Oh, really? I don't know what your opinions are, so this will be interesting.
Who wants to start?
I can go first, I guess.
Okay.
So it's kind of ironic because I'm wearing probably the most modern watch.
And you've been wearing your like vintage Submariner Tudor sub for the last like 3 episodes or something like that. Or no,
I've only worn it in one.
You only worn it in one?
Yeah, but I have worn it a lot.
Yeah.
Since I got it. It's probably my most worn watch since I bought it, and it's not close.
Yeah.
I have a couple reasons for liking vintage, and I was
over modern or in addition?
Over, like if I'm gonna spend my money, I'm probably buying in the vintage first.
Okay.
Interesting.
But it's not that I wouldn't spend on modern. It's just like if you gave me like $25,000 right now, what would I buy? I'd buy buying a vintage watch that I already know the watch I'd buy.
What?
It's a 1675, like really good condition gilt dial.
Okay.
But a couple of reasons why. So like watches are not investments, right? We all think that and say that.
Mm-hmm.
But
do we?
but I do think that there's something to be said for the fact that for vintage watches, when you do have something all original in phenomenal condition, there's a very small finite amount of them. Like, not that modern watches aren't good, but if I'm buying like a Rolex, for example, they make $1 million a year. Like in my head, I'm like, everybody can have this.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do buy something super unique like a vintage watch, most of the time, nobody will have something exactly similar to yours. Whether it's like on a 70s Rolex, there's like 3 or 4 different types of bracelets that you could have on the same watch made by different companies. It's just like much more unique, in my opinion. Secondly, most of the watches that were made vintage, and I'm not a vintage expert, I just want to say that. Watches that were made vintage wise specifically, they were mostly handmade. Today, a lot of the watches in the modern watch industry, not all of them, but a lot of them are machine made. And that's not a bad thing. They can get more precise. They can make better watches. But most of the watches back then were made, they didn't have the technology to make them. So I just like that aspect of it. I like the stories of the vintage watches. I also like how they age. Modern watches,
they don't
20
age.
years from now, a Rolex Submariner, like the 126 references, 20 years from now, going to look exactly the same, barring scratches. But a 70 sub looks completely different now than it did then, even though it's still the same watch and it looks very similar. There's also a multitude of other different reasons, but like value-wise, like when I'm wearing a vintage sub, the bezel, the bracelet, the crown, they all have value to them, which I like a lot. But there's also downsides to vintage, like finding parts is difficult, servicing is difficult, water resistance is very tricky unless you have a phenomenal watchmaker, and buying them is very difficult unless you have somebody that's really good.
So the way I kind of see it, the way you just described it is like, you're looking more, when you look at a vintage watch, you're looking at what the importance of this watch is and maybe the stories around it, but not so much like the functional aspects of in the modern today. Like you're not
100%.
looking for a watch just to tell you the time, because there's millions you can find, right? So I find that interesting because like I was actually reading, there was someone who's writing a book on Rolex and how Rolex was able to take the market, and it was in French, so it's not completely translated yet, but there was just one line that really stuck with me, and it just said that while other brands like Omega were talking about their watches, their functions, how great the watch was, Rolex's marketing strategy was always about like, you would buy this watch as a milestone, or like, this is the watch that professionals use. Like they would like put you in the shoes of the watch versus like just telling you this has 300-meter water resistance, blah, 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 blah. So, and in this like quick article, I got to find so I can share it later. This guy was saying that if it was just talking about the watches, Rolex and Omega, obviously, not just opinions, but Omega or Rolex, it would be a really close battle. A lot of times Omega would be better just as a watch itself. But obviously we know Rolex is the #1 biggest watch brand in the world. And so they've definitely done something right there. I think for me, I haven't done a lot of vintage watch buying. The most vintage watch I've had was a neo-vintage. It was a 16570 Polar Explorer 2 nice Rolex. Watch, yeah. It was from like I think it was like from the mid-2000s. So,
okay.
I forgot the exact movement.
We can't call that vintage.
It's like, yeah. Neo, it's like 20 years, almost 20 years ago. Yeah. So
no, I'm just saying, I don't like.
It's pretty modern.
New
Yeah.
Vintage because it dates
but that's
me.
That's like the most vintage watch I've had that I actually bought. I went out of my way to go find it. Yeah. I've had it, and then I enjoyed it for a little bit, and then I ended up not keeping it after a while. It was a great watch. It did work fine too, so I didn't really have any of the issues. Like it didn't have any failure or anything. The water resistance was fine and everything, but. I don't know. I'm just so used to buying modern, because if you were to tell me like 25,000, I'm like, I'm probably going to buy something modern just because, I don't know. I want something brand new. And then culturally too, I know that in like Chinese culture, like you're not supposed to gift a watch to someone, right? So it's also bad luck if you were to buy someone else's watch. Yeah. Because it's kind of like you're like counting down your time, and you're not like, that's why like usually at least in Chinese, people like to buy brand new, But obviously the younger generation who's more savvy and they know about pre-owned and they're enthusiasts, they don't really follow that. Yeah. But there's also like that cultural thing that's part of how people buy stuff too. Yeah. In some cultures, if you give someone a watch, it's like a bad omen. It's like you're counting down their time. So that's why I always think like if you buy a vintage watch, they probably have that same kind of mentality when it goes into that. I don't think you guys were expecting me to like tie that in. It was more like from the collector perspective.
I have strong opinions that are completely different. So let me caveat all of this with, for the longest time, my Grail watch was a Newman Daytona. Right. For the longest time. And then before I bought my Royal Oak, which was modern, I was going to buy a birth year Submariner, so 1985. And I ended up thinking, you know what, spend a little bit more money and get a Royal Oak. And then I also really liked, the baby Paul Newman, the Tudor Monte Carlo home plate, those vintage ones. Those are really cool as well, and more accessible. They're still expensive. I think $25,000 plus, or back in the day they were. I don't know what their market is now. But what happened was, just like being in the industry and seeing the vintage market, first of all, there's kind of like a couple things that have kind of soured me a little bit on just the vintage market in general. And that's not to say vintage watches individually. The first is, you go somewhere like the Diamond District or Burlington Arcade in London, you just see lineups of 30, 40 Newman Daytonas, vintage Submariners, just all sitting next to each other, like in a window. So, and they feed you this line that they're all rare. They're not rare.
I was about to just say that.
Not rare.
I was going to say, like, the story is that they're rare, and then you can walk in somewhere and there's like 30 of them on the wall.
Yeah, and look, like some of the really like big collectors, I'm really pissing Ben off right now.
No, I just have a response to it.
Some of the really like collectors that are really big into this, and also like, let us know what you think. Modern versus vintage. What do you think about modern? What do you think about vintage? Let us know in the comments. But they get into the real minutia. They're like, okay, so this watch says Rolex Cosmograph Oyster, but this one says Rolex Oyster Cosmograph, so it's worth 10 times as much. To me, like, give me the one that's worth, 10 times cheaper, because it's the same watch to me. It's like, I'm not the type that's going to get into that level of minutia to get to like, because the watch looks the same to me. And like, I know some people are like, oh, well, if you know, and like, yeah, I understand that. But for
most people don't know. That's the truth.
Most people don't know. And, so those are like the two main things. And then you see the other thing that sours me on the industry is a lot of these auction houses end up boasting the veracity of these watches, and then they end up being like Franken, which means put together with like a bunch of pieces from different watches, or like being outright fake, so the dial's been faked. And you see this, there was an Omega that went to auction. I think Omega bought it for millions of dollars. It ended up being a Franken watch. You see this over and over again, where even like the top auction houses sometimes can't get it right. And so it's really hard to trust the market that you're getting something genuine. You basically need, maybe one owner and to have all the original papers to even trust. And then like, you don't even know. So that's the other thing, is like, how can you be sure that what you're getting is legitimate? Because even some of the most reputable auction houses don't know or don't care. I don't know which is the case, that they're selling something that may have, a little bit of, a sketchy, like, past, or so those are like why I've been somewhat soured on the vintage market as a whole. I do like vintage watches, and there are a lot of vintage references that I do like and I would buy, but for me, that's why I veer towards modern, just because like what you're getting. You're not like, it's not trying to be marketed as something that's incredibly rare, when there like can be little differences that mean there are thousands and thousands of them more. And so, maybe it's just the marketing and the like verifying whether it's real that has turned me a little bit sour on it, but that's like where I am with it.
I'll dispute some. I think you're right about a lot of it. I think like the whole rarity thing where you like go to a market and you see 15 Paul Newman Daytonas and you're like, how can they be rare? It's like the same argument with like Rolex. It's like you go to like any like watch dealer show and you'll see like 25 GMT Master 2s and you're like, in like one booth, and then there's like a couple hundred other ones, and you're like, how are these possibly rare? Like you could just go and buy them. I agree with that.
I don't think my Pepsi is rare.
No. I'm not saying you. I'm saying that people think that. They're like, oh, it's so rare, but they don't see what we see.
I think it's hard. Like, I think it's hard to get, which is to me different. Like at retail than rare. You can walk into any gray market store and pick up Pepsi right now if you're willing to pay for it.
I think the thing about the Paul Newman, and when you go down 47th Street, you see 15 Submariners, and a lot, like I would say 99% of those are in a couple of things. They're incorrect. So like they're not period correct parts. Like the bezel will be either aftermarket, which is very hard to tell, to your point, about figuring out authenticity. And also they don't have, they might have service parts where like in 1975 Submariner will have a bezel from the late 80s or something that's not correct, to where when you don't care necessarily about vintage watches, which a lot of people don't, which is fine, they seem the same. But to a vintage collector and somebody that's super into it, not that they're better, it's just wildly different. Like they'll see all of those and be like, one of those is a good watch. The other thing that I personally find very important is condition. It's like when you see those 15 Newman Daytonas, let's say they're all 100% correct, about one of them is collectible because of the condition of the case. Is it polished? People like, it's kind of hard to explain if like you haven't like been down the rabbit hole. Not to say that that's a better thing if you've been down it. It's just like, it's really hard to explain unless you've like seen the best examples of vintage watches, and it's like, oh my goodness, that's all I want now.
So I have something to chime in that kind of combines both of what you're saying in like an agreeable way. And so recently I've been actually looking at some vintage watches. So I've been just browsing for like early Cartier Tortue monopushers because the new one came out this year, right? And so I found some, and these are not like super vintage, but at the time when they were released too, like the Cartier CPCP, these were only a couple hundred made as well. So I feel like what both of you guys are saying, I think what Ben is really talking about is rarity. And I think what Craig is talking about is like not falling for things that are just hard to get and thinking that it's rare because of that. Right. So for example, like if I wanted to look up so Vacheron has the 222 that came out on 2022, right? Yeah. That one at retail is like 80,000. But if you could find a vintage 222, like the original one that inspired everything else down the line, you might get it much cheaper than a modern one. So there's that first. It's a little cheaper. For a while,
those were selling like the
steel. They were selling crazy,
above the.
They were, So I'm talking a little more hypothetical because you're right. Like these are going to trade a little bit higher. So yeah, if you could find one that's less expensive than the modern one, then that's already one benefit. And on top of that, you have that story like this is what started everything else
like the
later.
Tag Heuer or Kith Formula One.
Versus the originals.
Yeah, the new ones are selling for like 1,500 or 2,000.
It's kind of like fabricated rarity versus like true rarity. Yeah. Right? Like.
Yeah, and the originals are like 300, 400.
But they could be more, sometimes.
Can you buy one or two?
I bought 4 of the originals, and I sold 2 of them, and I don't even advertise them because they're cheap, so I just have them on.
Did you make money on the 2?
Oh yeah.
Like good money?
Yeah, doubled.
Okay.
Yeah. Ben's wearing a brigade hat today. What do you mean? His life's changed.
But the other thing too about your point about the Paul Newman Daytona is right. The prices have come down, so it's like, oh, of course he's gonna say that, but like. They got so expensive because of the one that sold for millions of dollars. I don't think that they should be worth. They were like $300,000 $400,000. They should not be worth that much. They should be a $100,000 watch probably. But then I also believe that like a vintage Pepsi, a really good example is like $25,000 for a 1675. But I think they should be 35 or 40. But like, just because like. It's so funny. So the other thing, your point about like not knowing if they're legit or not, and this all, Eric Wind is like a friend of mine, and he's cool. Him and Charlie Dunn, they have Wind Vintage, and like they're the only guys I trust, because when I was with them, they were showing me watches from other dealers' watches on Instagram, and I pull up and be like, "Is this legit?" They look at it and they'd be like, "You see those hands? One's gold and one's steel," and like you wouldn't notice that as me and you, but like
white gold and steel.
Yeah,
or gold,
or rose gold and steel, but because of patina, it's so hard to tell.
Yeah. Wow.
One of the things about auction houses too, which is crazy, is every single one, it feels like every year now, has a terrible scandal from that account on Instagram. I don't know his name exactly.
Periscope. Yeah.
Which is like he will point out watches and be like, "This is so obviously like not correct," but that's kind of what Eric does. But he doesn't want to get in the weeds. He just tells me what's happening, but it's wild to me. Like the Speedmaster thing was crazy, and it just kind of like the watch industry like just kind of threw that under because nobody wanted to talk about it, but it was a huge
happened
problem.
so fast, and then it disappeared just as fast.
It was like it never happened.
Yeah.
Well, and then like on top of that, you have like brands potentially buying, like, well, Omega bought that watch, but the you know, the conjecture is that Rolex bought the Newman Daytona, and so are they artificially inflating the prices not only of vintage but of like that Newman Daytona, that sale? I mean, the market was going up from there, kind of set off a chain of events that not only caused like the vintage pieces to skyrocket in price, but modern Daytonas, and then modern steel sport watches, and then, you know, the Royal Oak and the Nautilus and the Overseas. So, you know, to me, it's kind of like if the brands are secretly buying, like inflating these prices and buying the watches, you know, and causing things like what is legit and what's not legit.
Yeah, you know, the only with auction houses. So when I bought my Zenith, the Chronomaster Original Collective Edition, when I started wanting it, it was when it was being auctioned at Phillips, right?
Yeah.
And I think the final hammer was around like 16,000. It was pretty high for that watch, but it is quite, you know, rare in a modern sense. 50 pieces limited. I love that watch that I have. I didn't buy it, obviously, and then I waited, and then about a year later, I got it. I will say significantly much less than what it actually hammered at auction, because I found a private seller and they obviously made money and I got a good deal and everyone was happy in that equation. So I want to say, like, sometimes you can't trust, because in the auction, like in that room is everyone's bidding on at the same time, and if they think it's worth it in that moment, they're gonna put the money down. But if you can find it, if you were to wait and maybe you were to find it a little bit later, another good example, what's it called, on Loop This, because I've been going on their side. I love looking at what they have just for fun.
Yeah.
Even if I bid a few times, I'm like $100, and then it goes up to like 35. I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah.
What's it called? So I saw that they had recently the Patek Philippe Nautilus Tiffany Blue dial. And remember a year or two ago where it went to auction, it was like 7 million.
Yeah. And
then now here, what's it called? They auctioned it for like under 2 million on Loop This just this year.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference. I don't know, but no one would have known someone was gonna auction it off and sell it a year later. But if you were to wait and then you were that same person, you could have saved 5 million.
Yeah.
That's a big amount.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, there's like a lot of smaller brands that like will put something up for auction and use it as kind of like a marketing.
It's smart.
thing. I mean, it's smart, but then like, what's the true market for that watch? It's just kind of like, it's like hype building, I guess. I don't know.
It's like a one of one in years. Yeah, that's why I find, like, I like going to the auction houses, because you can find deals if you like find them. But I just find it and there's people I know that work, that I'm not going to say who they are, that I know do shady shit. Like, for example, I'm like, no joke, they will take links out of watches that come in and then sell the links, because links can be so expensive on a vintage watch.
Yeah.
They will take them, sell them to a 47th Street dealer on eBay, and then just not tell anybody, because who's counting when they come in? They're not counting the links.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You know, and I know for a fact that happens. I've watched it happen, and it's like stuff like that. It's just, it rubs me the wrong way. So I get why.
Yeah. So I guess like I like vintage watches, but I'm just somewhat kind of, what's the word I'm thinking of? Just hesitant, or like just the state of the vintage market has left me a little bit jaded, where at this point, like, you know what you're getting with a modern watch, and I don't buy into the hype of, this is rare, or like, because I don't think any of the really modern watches, unless you're buying kind of like a one-piece MB&F or something, that they're like necessarily rare. I think that they can be hard to get. But for me, like, I don't generally buy on the secondary market for modern watches or modern like hype watches. I try and get it at retail if I can. I know not everyone has the ability to do that. Like, at least I know what I'm getting and I don't have to worry about it. And, I feel like it's much easier to ignore the hype, of like the secondary market when you're like kind of focused on retail. Whereas, the secondary market and the hype is such an ingrained part of the vintage market. But the thing that's interesting is during the kind of the fall of the market over the last 2 years, the biggest hit has been to the vintage market, like way more than modern watches. Vintage. You think?
I would argue the other way.
I've worked with secondary market sellers, and they have like vintage watches that will just sit there for 6 months and they can't get rid of them.
I guess if it's not Cartier or Piaget, like
it was like Rolex. They've Rolex that sit there for 6 months.
That's why,
like
I don't understand it because vintage Rolex is not hyped right now at all. Yeah. Just compared to like vintage Cartier, but like I would always buy vintage Rolex. But it's all like what you prefer and who's hyping it up. And
I've also seen like people that I know, like not really like watch collectors, but just people who go to like the Real. And they'll buy like a vintage Cartier, and I would see it and I'd be like, man, the condition is like not great. And then they would tell me how much they paid, and I'm like, you could have bought the modern Panther version of that, and that's the same watch with the new links, and you would have saved money too. And I sometimes feel like they kind of, I don't know. Sometimes people buy into the vintage that it's cooler sometimes, and it's their money, they can do what they want. But I'm like, that's not actually a good deal for you, especially if the modern one is already cheaper and it's brand new and it's yours. You can make all your memories with it. I've seen that happen too.
And then it can be vintage in 30 years and have all those problems.
At that time, you'll have multiple new watches in 30 years. Like, I don't see anything that I'm collecting today where I'm like, I don't know. I can't even think that far ahead. Like 30 years, will my watch be considered vintage? And like, I don't know, in the whole history of like watchmaking, they pushed the needle a lot, but at the same time, like, watch innovations are not like going by 10 years at a time. It's going really slow.
And the big innovations, which I would say aren't necessarily like super helpful to a watch, end up being really expensive. When you have like the Zenith with the 0G, not tourbillon, but
I know you're talking about. I forget what it's called.
And stuff like that. It's like those are cool like innovations, but they're also $100,000 at least. So,
and I don't think it's gonna get any more affordable unless they like mass produce a bunch of them, and then a lot of people are buying into that.
For me, I'll always buy them, but like for what you guys said, the last point, I'll only buy from one person. I don't trust anybody else when I'm buying a vintage watch, and it's not that I don't like those people. I want to buy it from the most knowledgeable. That's me.
Pay premium for that probably.
Yeah, but you buy the dealer. Yeah.
You buy the dealer.
Peace of mind.
You buy the dealer. I think that's why I want to spend the more money is I pay for the trust.
Yeah. I had a funny joke that happened to a buddy of mine. He, he's like a watch enthusiast. His wife is not. And so his wife finally was like, hey, I really want to get the Mission to Moon, one of the Moon swatches, the Jupiter one. So they bought it online, and then
was it fake?
It was fake. And he sent me a picture. He's like, "What do you think of this?" And normally I wouldn't respond to these because I'm like, it has nothing to do with me. But it was my friend, so I was like, I don't know. There's something really off about it. So then, I told him, like, hey, I'm actually going to Grand Central later for lunch. Like, I'll stop by the swatch store, and then if they have it, I'll pick it up and I'll ship it to you. Like, so I did that. I went there. I bought it. I took a picture. I sent it to him. He goes, "Oh my god, mine is so fake." So then I shipped it to him, and it was funny because he was like, man, I can't like trust buying stuff online. And then I jokingly said, see, this is why you should always buy from a dealer.
Yeah.
Even though like I didn't make anything, I just bought it for him and he just paid me back.
Where did he buy it from online?
I have no idea. I thought it was like one of those websites, and it's not eBay. It was like
StockX will like verify it.
It wasn't StockX. It was like It's like one of those websites. Like it's like almost he bought it on Etsy. Like basically,
AliExpress.
yeah, basically. Like oh wow, it's like it's like $100 off. Yeah, I'll buy it. And then he sends it. I'm like, you can see like the Jupiter ring is like in a wrong place.
Oh no!
Like if you have the real one there, you're like, who's faking these? These are like already inexpensive to buy. That you need to buy an inexpensive one.
Have like a mecha quartz movement in it, so the chronograph hand actually sweeps.
It sweeps.
It's actually a better movement inside the face.
It's actually a better watch. Yeah. We've improved it, but
take the case from the original and put the movement
inside
the
that's too much work. That's too much work.
Or the movement from the original inside the case of that would be cool too. I don't know if that would work though.
I don't think you could.
Can't.
I feel like it's just so much extra work to do that than to just leave it as it is.
It's crazy.
I think I agree with both your points on the vintage versus modern watches. For me, I'm still mostly a modern purchaser. Yeah. I like the only kind of opinion I can think of right now is like what I was mentioning with the Cartier Tour 2 mono pusher. Like, oh, if I can't get the new one, then maybe I'll look into getting a vintage one. But now in the vintage ones, there's tons of different like little design details on the dial. And it's not just text, but it's like whether the Roman numerals extend to the outer of the case or whether they're put in a circle, like that kind of thing matters to me. But
that's from like a design, not a price aspect.
Yeah.
I feel like some people collect like vintage Rolexes, and it's like where the writing is, it's not like a design thing for them.
Like it's red text
it's a rarity
versus white text
thing for them. This is more rare, and that's why I want it. The watch looks almost identical, but
it's rarity.
But it's rarity. Whereas what you're talking about makes like a little bit more sense to me because I like this design better.
Yeah.
Whether it's rarer or not as rare.
I guess mine is more like I would rather buy the yellow gold version than a rose gold version. Yeah. That's pretty much how I'm thinking. Like I'm not gonna go for the rose gold because I want the yellow gold.
Well, Cartier purchasers it's like a very design centric brand. I mean, they have some cool watches with good movements and things like that.
I think the Santos is the only watch. It's design focused, but people focus on the specs.
Yeah, it's the only one that you can actually boast about, like, the specs. There's a anti-magnetic ferro cage.
The bracelet.
The Easy Link, yeah. That's true. It is hard, like, even in my store just for Cartier Omega, like, I always see Cartier as like a go anywhere, do anything watch, even though it's very dressy. I don't even know why I'm going down this tangent right now. It has nothing to do with vintage.
Like go anywhere, scuff up anywhere.
Yeah, pretty much. Go anywhere and scuff up anywhere. But it always competes with
the Santos.
Yeah, but it always competes with the Omega Aquaterra in my store.
Really?
And then it doesn't come down to which watch functions better. It really comes down to like what do you like better on your wrist.
Yeah.
Because the price for the medium 7,000, the Aquaterra is like 6,600. Obviously the Aquaterra is a better watch. It has more water resistant lume, everything. But you get people who buy the Santos just because they like it on the wrist.
It's like, not like a reverse.
It's so different.
Santos.
Not much, yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of like square watches. I mean, you can think of like the Mito TV watch, plus the original 70s, the Monaco, the Santos. Like, I can't think of too many crazy big examples from major manufacturers.
No, you're right.
So I don't know why I brought that up, but because you mentioned the Santos and then it brought me to this.
You don't sell any pre-owned in your store.
No, we don't. Yeah, it's something we're considering, but again, like what you guys were saying, there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah.
It's something that concerns me a lot about pre-owned is stolen watches a lot. Yep. Because like what if you bought something and you unknowingly didn't know that it's stolen.
Yeah.
And I've heard stories of other people accidentally buying a stolen watch off someone. They sent it to service and then the manufacturer holds it and says like, hey, this is actually a stolen watch reported X amount of years ago. Yeah. So you need to show who you bought it from, and like it becomes this whole deal too.
And you never get it back. That's when I do buy pre-owned. This is, again, not an ad. I just talk about them all the time. Like Bezel, what they'll do, you buy from them, they'll actually run it through that system.
Okay.
I think it's the same one that the brands do. So you get the verification that it's not real. And they've had a lot of stolen watches come through.
That's crazy.
What do they do with it? To
be honest, I can ask. I don't know off the top of my head. Well, they have sent it back. So like they actually sourced a Royal Oak for somebody. This was like a year and a half ago, and they told me about it. And it came through. Everything was legit, but it came back stolen. And then they were like, well, they had to sense the cops or something. And then the seller was mad. The buyer was mad. It was a whole ordeal.
Yeah, because sometimes the seller itself, they're getting it from someone else. And so it might not be the seller also knowing that it's stolen. There's like a lot of like gray area in that. That's why it's called the gray.
And then eventually it probably like sells to 5 people. And then all of a sudden somebody has it. They have no idea if it's stolen or not. And they're just going with the flow.
Until they send it into service.
Yeah. Only then it gets to the consumer.
So if you're worried about selling your stolen watch, sell it to like an individual as opposed to...
Yeah, you can pay for the system, but it's expensive.
Yeah. So, okay, I do want to talk about stolen watches a little bit. It was a topic I thought about a while ago, and since we're talking about it now...
Well, there was news last night. Someone got mugged for a $100,000 watch, I think on the Upper East Side.
Oh, really?
Last night, yeah. And so my non-watch friends, my law school friends that I'm in a group text with, were kind of like, saying, oh my God, like this is crazy. And I was like, yeah, like I walked down the street wearing my Pepsi, like you lose your arm. I was like, I walked down the city, through the city yesterday wearing my Pepsi. And they're like, well, that was bold. I was like, well, it's like, I'm not going to lose money because it's insured, but I might lose my arm.
Yeah.
But like in the industry right now, 2 years ago, watch theft was happening so rampant, and we would hear it all about in the news. And then every time you have a friend send you an article about someone's watch being stolen, but these past few years, it still happens, but the news about it is a lot more quiet, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So there's a few initiatives that I know some companies have been doing. So on Richemont's side, they started something called Inquiris. It's basically a database where if your watch is stolen, you register to this global database, and then multiple like police agencies around the world can access it. And that might be one of the things that Bezel uses. I'm not sure, but that's one of the programs. There are some other companies that do something similar. The other thing was AP did the
you re-register. But that's more.
That's also interesting.
But that's meant to track their their customers when they're selling them. They'll call you and ask you why you sold your watch.
No, I'm talking about AP had coverage service. It was if your watch was stolen, lost, or damaged, they would replace your watch up to $55,000 for free.
So the people that bought it with that coverage no longer have the coverage, or are they grandfathered?
So I can talk from experience because I luckily was able to get a Royal Oak from the boutique last year.
And you lose it?
No. But I was able to register it. So the way it works is you buy an AP from the boutique. You register your watch under your profile. Every brand does this now. They want your client information for a few reasons. One is they can extend your warranty, right? That's what they say they'll do. But in exchange, they get your client information, which for them, you're a customer in the future. They want to advertise to you. They can do that because they have your information. So that's the 5-year warranty under AP. The other thing is at that time, you can register for AP coverage service, and it's a free 2-year service. So if you bought your watch in 2023, it would be until 2025 for 2 years. Lost, stolen, damaged, your watch would be covered under this like internal insurance, I would say. But I made a video on it, and everyone was like, oh, I'm gonna get my friend to steal my watch, all this stuff. And I was like, it's not that easy because you need an official police report. Even when you have the police report, they're still gonna do their own investigation. And I'm so curious, like, I did try to ask the boutique people one time, like, is there any new news? Like, has anyone reported it? Do you guys know anything? They didn't really have anything to share. And even if they did, I don't think they would want to talk about it publicly.
Did you have the coverage for the full 2 years?
I do. Yeah. Okay. I'm still covered for my watch, which is good. So that's why I feel every once in a while when I want to wear it, I will wear it. And I feel like, okay, at least I know where I'm going. Usually if I wear a watch like that, I want to know where I'm going and how I'm getting home kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not like, I'm just going to walk around Central Park today with my watch. Like, there's no reason to do that.
Well, there's the people that also say, like, oh, like, wear a fake instead. I'm like, well, I'd rather insure my watch and wear the real thing than, like, get beaten up or mugged for something that's fake. Even if you have, like, the real version. Like, some people are like, oh, buy the fake and the real version. Just get insurance.
I don't understand that either.
And then there's a company that, like, has these replacement clasps that, like, lock. And I was like, that to me, I was like, if someone's going to like hold me up for a watch, I don't want to not be able to take my watch off and give it to them. Like if it's like very dangerous, I'd rather have insurance and then deal with that. I like at the end of the day, as much as we all love watches, they're just, material things, and like your safety and health are more important than, that watch. So get it insured, but don't, like, it's one thing if it's like you have a Cartier love bracelet on, which everyone knows you can't really take off. But if you have a Rolex on and like you have this like clasp that locks on your wrist, and someone's like threatening you, that to me is like a little bit scary.
Yeah, I'm gonna share some information I think might be helpful to the listeners. So in my store, I've dealt with a few customers who've had their watches stolen, and I will second that getting insurance is the right thing. I don't have a preferred insurance provider, but if there's a watch insurance provider that wants to sponsor our podcast, please reach out to us because we'll mention it next time. So basically, there's two scenarios. One scenario was a few years ago, I had a couple come in. They said that their watches were unfortunately stolen from their house. I don't remember the watch. It was like a Rolex Yachtmaster and something else. So they had a check from the insurance company. And the way it worked was they were allowed to use this check to replace the value of what they insured. So they insured maybe 9,000 or something. So maybe it's not a Yachtmaster, but they insured 9,000. Came to my store, said, I got to use this check to make sure that to use on another watch. So since it was a couple, they actually ended up doing two watches. They bought like a Cartier and a Grand Seiko, for example. Yeah. And they were happy. I remember I actually called the insurance company like after they weren't able to take the watch with them right away. Yeah. So, we had the check. So I called the insurance company just to verify, like, hey, is this check legit from your company before we release this watch in a few days? Yeah. And then they told us yes. And then I was just curious, like, how do you verify when someone's watch is actually stolen? Like, how do you know someone didn't just report it stolen, they still own it? And then they said, oh, you need a police report and this and that. And I don't know, they probably... I believe these customers because they don't seem like the type of people to do it. Yeah. But it's always just been a question, like, how do you? Everyone always talks like there's loopholes to doing things like that. The second, it was a recent one. I had a customer who bought a Omega Speedmaster with me, and then he lives in New York City. He said that he had like a apartment party and he didn't like lock his watch away. It was on his table, and I guess some randos were at his party, friends of friends, and someone just stole his watch. And he bought that watch for a job promotion that he wanted to celebrate. So not even a year later, he comes back to me and he tells me the story. I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, and he just tells me he just wants to buy another watch. And I was like, dude, like, I'll help you report the watch to Omega. I'll help you do this and that. But like, because I feel bad, you're going to literally buy a whole nother watch. You're buying it 2 times. Yeah. So I told him like, I sent it to Omega and basically they said, we're happy to help you, but we need a police report. We need verification that this was actually stolen, like a track record. You can't just like say it and you just get it out of nowhere. So I told him to do that, and I don't think he ever did. He was kind of like whatever, but I don't think he had it insured too. So, some people he was just like he'll just take it as a loss, and I feel bad because that's not his fault. Like you being nice and someone steals from you is like such an awful thing. Yeah.
Well, if you aren't, I mean, even if you are insuring your watches, you should lock up them in a safe at your home. It just like I have my valuable watches are all in like a safe that's bolted down.
Same with me.
Like so people can't just like come in. It has multiple. You have to do multiple things to get into it. Some of my less expensive watches aren't in safes. But yeah, I mean, I would always lock your watches away, regardless of whether you have insurance.
Do you guys use safety deposit boxes at all, like at banks?
I used to.
You used to?
I used to.
What was that experience like?
It was a little bit difficult to get in. Like, for me, I like to have ease of access because I mean, you're just so busy that like you need a watch, you want it right now. You gotta go walk there. You gotta go security, unlock it. It's just like. Yeah, in my opinion, was a pain. So I literally was like, I'm not doing this. I'm getting a safe. We're gonna get it in the literally bolt it. Yeah. And I'm just doing that because it was annoying. But also at that time, I had a lot more watches of a higher value than I do now because I'm just like some of them I was like consigning. So there was that whole thing where it wasn't even my watch I had. I was this is crazy. So that's why I prefer it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I haven't used safety deposit box. I use a safe as well. Yeah. And Get insurance, people.
Get insurance.
Even home insurance has valuables for watches too.
Mine does.
But
that's why I use for.
But most home insurances do not include jewelry and watches as part of the main policy. So don't expect that your watches get stolen, that your home insurance
and it only happens if you're home, if it's stolen from your house. If you're wearing it out and it's stolen,
so
it's not insured.
I use a jewelry company that covers the watch.
And we'll mention it if you sponsor us.
So I think that's the episode for today.
Yeah, it's good. It's perfect.
I think we touched a lot of cool topics that all relate to each other. Started from vintage watches versus modern, into Franken watches, which led into stolen watches, which led into insurance. Yeah.
Well, that's the whole problem. One more thing about vintage watches. If you get your vintage watch stolen, it's much harder to replace it than if you get your modern watch stolen. It's a lot easier. So that's a point for.
But also, like when you replace a modern watch, a lot of companies don't want to do it for the the replacement value. It's like the retail value. So if it's like a Daytona that retails for $15,000 and sells on the secondary for $40,000.
The one I used for my Rolex, you could pick the value that I insured it for. At least.
But then you have to get like appraised. Like so, I figure that like I can hopefully convince if my watch gets stolen, convince my AD to sell me another if I, rather than pay the extra money
to get it on the gray market. You probably just would get another watch at that point. But I guess they wouldn't.
So.
Well,
that's our advice.
Yeah.
Get your watch
insured, please.
Get them insured. Get a safe, get them insured.
Awesome.
All right. Cool. Till next time.
Till next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for tuning in.
Appreciate it.